Metal Gear Solid is a series that I slowly warmed to over time. With the release of the Master Collection in 2024 that made everything all the way from the original Metal Gear on the MSX all the way up to MGS3 available on modern systems, I decided to dive right in with MGS2 and simply fell in love with the series. Which is a wee bit ironic given that now I'd say MGS2 is one of my least favourites.
The plots, the characters, the stupidly long cutscenes, all of this combined together to make one of my favourite series of games ever made. And out of what I would consider the big three stealth series before Assassin's Creed came out, those being Metal Gear, Hitman and Splinter Cell, it's the one I enjoy the most.
I mean, I must like them, since I have the iconic exclamation mark tattooed on my arm. And over the last year, or however long it's been since I last uploaded, I've made videos talking about MGS2, 3, and the Twin Snakes. And while I'm happy with 2 out of those 3 videos, I wanted to make a love letter to the original Metal Gear Solid, because I've come a hell of a long way from hating it as a late teenager to now having it permanently inked on my skin. So yeah, without further ado, let's infiltrate via torpedo and talk about MGS.
The first game was released in 1998 on the PlayStation 1, making it one of the later released classics on the system. A lot of games that people associate with PS1 seem to be released between 1995 with the release of the console and 1997 like the original Crash Bandicoot, Final Fantasy VII and Tomb Raider. But to give MGS1 some flack, Spyro, Silent Hill and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater were not released in the same time frame, so MGS didn't usher in the end of the console's golden years just yet.
I wanted to take a little bit just to kind of go off script a little and talk about this. The actual physical release of Metal Gear Solid, since physical releases are something that I've touched on in the past but I've never actually properly looked at. And I love this little console, this little game here, this box and everything. Like this Yoji Shinkawa artwork on the front is fantastic, and like my copy's a bit worn because I got it second hand, but it's like the dual layer case. You know, you've got all the artwork and stuff on the back. I love this artwork. I think it's fantastic. You know, it tells you that it's analog controller compatible, that you can save it to your memory card, if anyone remembers that. I wasn't quite born for the PS1, but I remember the PS2, so memory cards were definitely a problem while I was growing up. We actually have a demo here for the original Silent Hill, because that was set to come out, I think, the year after this. And we've got, it's a playable demo, which apparently Silent Hill can't get away from the word playable teaser in some way. And then, what have we got here? We've got the manual, which, do you guys also miss, like, when games came with actual, like, really good manuals? Like, because I do. I definitely miss this era. We get, like, a little sort of history here on Metal Gear. We get, you know, a little bit about Foxhound and like the plot, I guess. How to insert the second disc, because this comes on like 2 CDs, which is, I think they hold like 700 megabytes each. And yeah, that's insane. I absolutely love these. Like, these are genuinely like little art books as well. You know what I mean? Like, you get all these like lovely screenshots, but you get to see like all this kind of stuff of like the places the camera can be and all that kind of stuff. I genuinely really missed this. This was fantastic. Like, I really want all this to come back. Please, game devs or designers or publishers or whoever is in charge of making these things happen, can we please make them happen again? Because, like, yeah, it tells you about, like, game over, continues. I mean, look at that. You get, like, this lovely fold-out artwork right here. And look at that! Look at that. That is some absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous art right there of all the main players. You know, and, like, the Metal Gear over at the side here. This is great! Why are we not making more of this? You know, you find out about your items and things like that. All the weapons that you'll get. I genuinely love this. This is fantastic. Some amazing artwork here of those levels from a perspective that you would never see. And you get to see like the whole layout and everything like that, instead of having to rely on maps that other people have done. Again, just more of Yoji Shinkawa's fantastic artwork. Fantastic, really. We get a page all about Foxhound and stuff. And you get like a little bit of insight on each of them. Some of the genome soldiers, Grey Fox, even Big Boss. Even though he's like never actually seen at any point in the game, we get a bit about Big Boss. I didn't even know that Natasha Romanenko was in the game. Not a clue, because she's completely and utterly optional. I think she's mentioned in one line of dialogue to do with your codec. But, I mean, like, that's it. But yeah, so that's like one half of the case, because then, and I do this very carefully because this copy is slightly broken, we get the 2 discs, and we've got a snake on each disc. So this one we have Solid, and on this one we have Liquid, which is really, really lovely. Like, again, why are we not doing more of this? Like, proper, really good artwork and things like that. I think this should become the standard again. I genuinely love it.
Starting on the main menu, there is a section known as VR Training. These 10 missions can be played before the main game and explain all the mechanics that will be vital to completing Snake's journey. They take place in digitised voids that look similar to dev rooms. These were pretty fun to work my way through, if a tad easy since I played them after the main game, but luckily there was more with the release of Metal Gear Solid Special Missions. Special Missions was a separate game released in 1999 and was basically a whole disc filled to the brim with these VR levels that the developers had made in their free time. I gave it a quick go, and it certainly would be a good time killer for some MGS style gameplay without all the long cutscenes.
Speaking of cutscenes, Metal Gear Solid has one of the best opening cutscenes I've ever seen. Sets the tone perfectly, and it covers all of our major players in one swift motion. Kojima's cinematic influences are incredibly obvious here. This feels like the opening to like a James Bond or Jason Bourne or a Mission Impossible, or any of those kind of like espionage spy movies. It feels like the opening to one of those.
We are playing as the previously established Solid Snake from the first 2 Metal Gear games as he infiltrates an Alaskan nuclear weapons disposal facility on Shadow Moses Island. The facility has been taken over by an army of soldiers being led by the Special Forces group Foxhound. Snake was previously part of this unit but now stands against them as the remaining members have become something of a terrorist group. Each member has their own quirks that make them memorable and means they stand out from one another. Sniper Wolf, Revolver Ocelot, Vulcan Raven, and Psycho Mantis all have unique designs, personalities, and boss arenas that are both unique yet coherent so that they don't feel jarring when they are cleared and just become normal rooms in the facility. That's not to mention the man in charge of these mercs and soldiers, our clone brother Liquid Snake. The group plans to launch a nuclear strike unless they are given the remains of Big Boss, the soldier that Liquid and Solid are cloned from, and the one that Snake killed in both Metal Gear games. We are tasked with sneaking into the facility and rescuing 2 hostages along with stopping Foxhound. On the codec we have a support team consisting of Colonel Campbell, Mei Ling, Naomi Hunter, and Master Miller, who later gets revealed to be Liquid in disguise. In the facility itself, we meet and are helped by the Colonel's niece, Meryl Silverberg, and the scientist who designed Metal Gear Rex, Hal Emmerich, also known as Otacon.
It's like one of my Japanese animes.
So this cast of characters is going to be like the general setup that all of the games going forward will sort of copy, where you've got, some sort of Snake as the main character, whether it's Solid or Big Boss or Naked Snake or Raiden in MGS2. And you've got your support team over the radio, and then you've got a few characters that help you out in the field as well. I feel like I really got to know my support team in MGS1 because there were quite frequent calls with them. Obviously you've got other characters like Meryl and Hal helping out, but the codec team in this game feels like vital to your success, whereas in some of the other games, like in MGS3 for example, your codec team doesn't feel as vital to completing your mission. They're just kind of there.
The twists these characters go through despite never physically appearing on screen had me hooked from all the lying and backstabbing with characters hiding information from Snake and thus the player. It puts you on edge and makes you wonder just how much you can trust who you're talking to, and this is used perfectly when the big reveal happens that Liquid has been playing havoc with your team by disguising himself as Master Miller.
Everyone comes clean in the end, but for most of the runtime the only people you can really trust is Merrill and Otacon, because they're the only people who don't lie to Snake about mission critical stuff from like the get-go. Everyone else is sort of hiding things and not telling Snake the whole truth, but these characters, they tell you everything. And probably out of the cast, Otacon's my favourite, which is actually quite good given that he turns up in MGS 2 and 4 as Snake's main support. So it's kind of important, I think, that Otacon was likeable in this game because he's a major player going forward. The first level of this game can be summed up as simple yet effective. It's probably the best teaching tool that you could have for Metal Gear's particular brand of stealth.
The dock is nothing more than a square grid with a few extra little bits for it to actually dock ships. There are 4 squares in the middle taken up by containers, with only 2 guards roaming around who can't see much further than one of those containers. The goal is to get from the dock side all the way to the elevator at the other end of the room, but with the caveat that you need to wait for the elevator to come down first. This creates a stealth arena for a new player to grasp the basics of enemy sightlines, movement, hiding against walls, but more than anything, it's a chance to let the game scroll through its very cinematic credits. I'm saying it's good, but the easiest strategy is just to hide behind the forklift right next to the elevator and stay out of sight until the time is up.
I'm maybe hyping up this starter room a bit much, but there's elements of what I'm talking about in every stealth arena in the game. There are a few options when it comes to stealth. You can learn enemy patterns and just completely avoid the guards, you can shoot them with a SOCOM, or you can choke them out.
I find that the most reliable non-lethal option is just to learn the patterns and run past them. I found the choke option to be really hit or miss, with my attempts often ending in me getting spotted or throwing someone to the ground because I was slightly holding the left stick in a direction and didn't have it perfectly neutral. Avoiding enemy guards of course comes with its own difficulties, like having to learn patterns and staying out of overlapping lines of sight from guards, cameras and turrets. The hard part is that you don't always have a great view of the area around you, and that is where the Soliton radar comes into play. The Soliton radar is a useful tool with an unfortunate side effect. The Soliton radar is a top-down perspective on the area around you and allows you to see the enemy vision cones and positions far beyond what you could see without constantly swapping to first person and back again, which would grind the pace to a halt. The only issue with it is that it's so vital to doing well that I ended up playing Pac-Man a lot more than I did MGS. There is simply no way that I can figure out to get through the game without using the radar, and whenever it was off, like when it was jammed or when I was in an alert phase, I felt like I was playing the game blindfolded. Suddenly the game becomes far less fair since guards just appear from off screen and knock you to the ground before you can even react. I think the series did the right thing in moving away from this design and getting rid of the radar in 3 and onwards. It forces the player to take in their surroundings a lot more and gets you more immersed in the world and atmosphere of the game instead of just staring at the top right corner. There's so much effort put into the art assets of MGS, Twin Snakes and MGS2 that it's such a shame that most players will be forced to ignore it for what is essentially a vector game.
On that note of art assets, let's talk about graphical fidelity. It's nowhere to be seen. Yeah, the game looks a little bit shit now, but I think there's a certain charm to having all these like handcrafted animations and them not having any facial animation. It still weirdly draws me in. Like, I still feel for all of these characters, despite the fact that none of them can emote properly. Which is a really good quality for this game to have, given that there's some very lengthy cutscenes. You knew I was going to talk about them at some point.
This game features many a lengthy cutscene, and in fact the whole series does, although each game utilises them differently and to varying degrees of success. Here in MGS1, however, they are used effectively, being a break from stretches of gameplay when we reach a new beat in the plot. Each boss gets a cutscene before and after it, meeting new characters gets a cutscene, important moments like Meryl sharing her backstory get a cutscene, and of course, exposition or mission updates. The codec also plays a part in this, as well as being the only way that we can contact our support unit or other characters at various points when we are separated from them. The codec pictures are more stylized drawings of the characters that can display more emotions than the in-game models, and this was a great choice for some of those intense scenes, like when Snake is questioning his support unit, or when Otacon warns you about the soldiers in the elevator. I love the codec.
I love refrigerators.
I want to touch on boss fights because this entire series, it's not just Metal Gear Solid 1, has a massive problem of having boss fights that conflict with the main mechanics and the controls that the stealth is based around. Out of all the bosses in the series, I can maybe think of like 4 that gel really well with the mechanics and controls. Like, not that the other fights are bad by any means, but just that in all the other ones there's a little bit of friction when compared to the 4 that I'm thinking of, and out of that, 3 of them are from this game.
I'll cover my least favourite first. Rex has 2 phases, one where you need to shoot the dish, and the second where you need to shoot liquid. Seems easy enough, so what's the problem? First off, you need to use the stinger to do these things, but the stinger can only be used in first person, meaning you can't move while aiming. And Rex's missile attacks are so quick and have such a wide area of effect that I actually said out loud while I was playing, how was I meant to avoid that? I did of course beat the boss, but it was by far the fight I got hit the most in and used up my entire supply of rations very quickly. I was so relieved when it was finally over, and I think it was a real disappointment for being the fight this whole series is named after. Vulcan Raven felt like a game of predicting and outsmarting my enemy rather than a straight up duel, which I liked. It forced me to utilise more of my gear like claymores and C4, which otherwise would have gone unused for my whole playthrough. It was a nice change of pace to be forced to use stealth in a boss encounter since I was so overwhelmed in sheer firepower. Certainly a highlight of the game, but not quite my favourite. Everyone knows that Psycho Mantis is one of the best bosses in the history of games. Not necessarily for the fight itself, but for how he completely decimates the already cracked fourth wall. Throughout the game, characters will openly reference the controller, like at the beginning when the Colonel says, "When you want to use the codec, push the select button." But Mantis is the only character to reference the player directly by reading your memory card and commenting if you have certain games on it, and using the power of his mind to vibrate your controller. Mantis's whole design is to fuck with the player, because to beat him you have to change controller ports so he can't, quote, read your mind. It's my favourite by far in the whole game, and my god, I wish we had a boss fight in another game that would screw with the players like this.
I wasn't able to read the future. The strong man doesn't need to read the future. He makes his own.
The game features 2 different endings which hinge on one choice that the player makes after being captured.
Ocelot will put the player through shock torture, and the player can choose to either submit or resist. If the player resists the torture, they leave with Meryl at the end, but if they submit, Meryl dies and the player will leave with Otacon. Later games would prove that the Meryl ending is the canon one, but I think the Otacon ending can hold just as much merit, since Snake and Otacon's relationship throughout this series is a way stronger plot thread than the relationship with Meryl, which goes nowhere after this game, aside from a brief mention in MGS4. I think making the choice of what ending you get a player-driven one brought on by how willing they are to physically mash the resist button for brief yet tense periods is a perfect choice, and adds some extra satisfaction if the player resists and saves Meryl.
So I've spent all this time talking about how amazing Metal Gear Solid 1 is, but let's say you've been persuaded and you want to get your hands on it. How do you do that? Well, there's a few options. One is the old classic emulation. I don't recommend this because it's never going to be quite accurate to how the game was originally intended to be played. And there's a few things that MGS1 in specific does that make it a bit of a pain in the arse when it comes to emulation. Of course, you can upgrade your experience by, modifying the frame rate or upscaling and things like that. But for me personally, I'd rather get something close to the original intent, which would be tracking down a PS1 copy. Now, PS1 copies of MGS1, I've never seen them go for a particularly high price. and it's fairly easy to get your hands on, but it means that you need to have original hardware. At the very least, you need a PS2, and I know that there's a lot of people now that might want to play MGS1 that don't have a PS2 or a PS1 to play it in. So this option may very well be off the table. And of course, there is the Master Collection that came out. This is probably the best way to do it because it's fairly close to original intent. It's, you know, plug in and play. You buy the game and it just works. And honestly, it's probably the best version for keeping a lot of the stuff that this game does intact. Like switching controller ports, you've got a digital port on like the game's external menu, and then also it comes with like a digital manual which emulates looking at the back of the CD case to get Meryl's codec frequency, which I absolutely love. It's such a good workaround for games that now don't inherently come with physical media. It was a really good idea at the time, but it becomes hard to port later, and I really like that workaround. That is a fantastic idea. The only real problem I found with it was occasionally some of the cutscenes that use full motion video, or FMV for short, they have a problem of the audio kind of glitching out and occasionally lagging behind, or it gets like really crackly, which means that the ending credits song, sadly, is just destroyed. You cannot listen to it properly. And this sometimes happens in cutscenes where there's dialogue, which is particularly frustrating. But honestly, if that glitch wasn't there, I'd say that the Master Collection is the best port and way to play MGS1 that you could get in today's age. But if this original PS1 copy with all of its graphics and its gameplay and everything like that is a little bit too archaic or a bit too old for you, there is always another option. So we're jumping ahead here a couple of years from 1998 to 2004. We're now well and truly into the 6th console generation, and some of the best games ever made have already been released, like Silent Hill 2 and 3, Metal Gear Solid 2 and all that kind of stuff. So, with the blessing of Kojima, Silicon Knights went back and remade the original Metal Gear Solid 1 for the GameCube, and it's called the Twin Snakes. Now, some people believe this is an absolute bastardization of the original material, and I quite frankly disagree. I think this is fine. I think it's a pretty good port overall and a fairly good remaster. It retools a lot of the stuff and it runs on the MGS2 engine, so it brings over some of the improvements from that, like being able to aim in first person and all these kind of things.
The addition of being able to roll, though, makes the Metal Gear Rex fight so much less of a ball ache, since you have a movement option that actually lets you get out of range of the missiles and makes that fight so much more enjoyable. However, as a counterpoint, the addition of first-person aiming does destroy other encounters like Ocelot.
I don't want to talk about it too much since I've already made a whole video on Metal Gear Solid 1 The Twin Snakes, but if this is the version that you want to play, good luck, because it's a bit of a pain to get your hands on. That copy cost me about nearly 70 quid, which is, you know, near enough the price of a brand new game on PS5 these days. Which, yeah, doesn't make it ideal, and also the GameCube is such a pain in the arse to get games for. But if that's the version you want to play, and you want to emulate it, be my guest. And with that, we conclude our trip to Shadow Moses. I hope you've all enjoyed the trip. And I want to quickly just conclude my thoughts with MGS1 here, because while it was never my favourite in the series, I always preferred the later games, and I still kinda do. But this now, story-wise, and the fact that I've actually played through it now and I kinda get how it works, it's now up there with some of my favourite games, like, you know, the original Resident Evil series, the Silent Hill games, and, I mean, yeah, I've got it tattooed on me along with Resident Evil, and I do plan on getting a Silent Hill tattoo at some point. So, I mean, yeah, it's really, really good. It's probably the most difficult to get into, because, you know, looks old and things like that, and it's a bit janky here and there with its mechanics, which me personally, I love. I love the charm of old PS1 games, but there's some people that really just cannot get past even the graphics, which to me that is like the stupidest reason to not get into a game at all, because of the graphics. That's kind of like saying that you won't watch a film unless it was made after 1990, but you know, I digress. You know, the mechanics are a bit off at times, they're a little bit janky, which could potentially throw some people off, but overall, yeah, I'd say while it's not aged amazingly, it's held up a lot better than I expect. I mentioned earlier on that compared to games like MGS2, 3, 4, basically all the later games in the series, especially 5, this is really, really stripped back. Like, this is the most bare bones Metal Gear game that you could play, aside from maybe the MSX games. But, I mean, if you can get past that, genuinely, seriously, right, from the bottom of my heart, and I know I say this in every single video, but I really do recommend you play Metal Gear Solid 1. This game right here is fantastic, and the series would only continue to get better as MGS2 made leaps and bounds, and then MGS3 got even better. MGS4, please port it to modern systems, please. I really want to play MGS4 now at 60 FPS rather than having it chug on the PS3. Please re-release it. I wouldn't recommend MGS1 as a jumping in point to the series unless you want to go in release order. If you're not sure if you'll like MGS Stealth, I would recommend MGS3. It requires the least amount of knowledge of the series, and it's probably one of the better mechanical stealth games that I've played. But really, at the end of the day, the main thing that I want you to take away from this video is that you should play this game. Whether you're emulating it, whether you've bought a PS1 copy like me, whether you play the Master Collection, or hell, even if you play the Twin Snakes, you should play MGS1 in some way. Whatever way you do it, that's up to you. But please do. And I hope you have fun with it. Because I sure did. Good night.
I know what I'm saying.